as solar expands, more and more people are experiencing the benefits firsthand, and they're talking to their friends and families and neighbors about what that looks like. That really is what fuels greater public support.
It is the busy time of year. For those who don't know, New York's legislative session runs from January through about June, but the state budget is due by April 1st-ish. So a lot of the important legislation is being discussed right now, with other bills being pushed as part of the rest of the session towards June. No matter when you listen to this podcast, you can click on the links in the show notes to see the current status of the bills we talk about. This is Plugging In. I'm Barry Wygel. Welcome to Plugging In, powering our way to a brighter and healthier New York. I'm your host, Barry Wygel. Each episode on this podcast, we will discuss a different topic related to clean energy, explaining complex topics in a way you can understand. Become part of the community as we help to make a brighter and healthier New York.
As the sun crests on the horizon, a new day dawns in our state. A new hope for tomorrow is rising, a clean future we create. Tomorrow we breathe easier, tomorrow the skies are clear. Today we are plugging in, the future of New York is here.
Joining us on this episode of the podcast is Elena Weissman, the Northeast Regional Director at Vote Solar. So Elena, can you start by telling me a little bit what Vote Solar is?
Yes. Hi, Barry. Thank you for having me on. Vote Solar is a nonprofit advocacy organization. We work in about half of the states in America to advance policies at the state level that make solar and clean energy solutions accessible to all. We've been around since 2002. We work in the legislative and regulatory realms. I cover the legislative side for New York and Massachusetts. I'm based in Brooklyn and excited to be here.
Excellent. Yes, thank you for being here. So do you work on residential, community, and grid scale, or just one of those sectors?
That's a good question. Vote Solar mostly focuses on distributed generation, so that's residential and community solar.
Well, you must be doing something right, because we've had a lot of success, particularly in that area. So that's good to hear.
We really have.
You focus on those two states, but I'm sure you have a kind of a view of what's going on elsewhere. So how does New York rank in terms of friendly solar policies?
That's a good question. So I do have colleagues that work across the country and hear from them about how lucky I am to be working in New York. So you're right to flag that. Definitely New York is a leader in solar policies. We're one of the most supportive states for distributed generation specifically. I would say we have a very strong foundation, especially in community solar. You named that we've done really well. Recently, we reached our goal of 6 gigawatts of distributed solar several years early and just expanded the goal to 10 gigawatts by 2030. So that's excellent. We're working with partners on a roadmap to get to 20 gigawatts by 2035, which we think is totally doable with the right policies in place. Another strength that we have is that our solar projects have created a lot of jobs here. I think the number is 14 or 15,000 jobs through solar projects in New York. So that's a huge boost to the local economy. And I'll just give another plug for distributed generation. 93% of New York's installed solar capacity right now is rooftop and community solar. So a major chunk of our solar clean energy is coming from these distributed projects. So yeah, I would say those are some of the strengths. In terms of what we can do better, the two things that come to mind three things that come to mind are related to permitting and interconnection and the solar tax credit. When it comes to permitting, it only takes 1 or 2 days to install a residential solar project, but it could take months to get the permits. So those delays are really one of the most costly parts of solar installations and one of the biggest reasons why people cancel their projects. The other reason that goes hand in hand with that is interconnection. So what we really need in New York to help with the costs and delays related to interconnection is a flexible interconnection policy instead of relying on traditional distribution upgrades to accommodate these small solar and storage projects. Flexible interconnection, which is common in the United Kingdom, and there was a successful pilot project here through National Grid, really could aid with that. And the last thing I'll mention is that our solar tax credit has not been updated in decades. The majority of people with solar accessible rooftop, people whose rooftops could host the solar project, are low income and they cannot access the solar tax credit. It's too low and it's not refundable. And it also leaves out condo owners and co-op shareholders. So definitely need to update that, make it more modern. That's something that was included in both the Assembly and Senate One House budgets, and we're hoping that the governor will follow suit.
I'm almost surprised to hear that colleagues are jealous that you get to work in New York because, you fly to California and you fly over the desert and you see these vast swaths of land that sometimes have these massive solar arrays that are built in nice, perfect squares because they have flat land. It's easy to do it. It's on the outskirts of the town. So I assume there are still places that are easier to site solar, but then are there places that are harder than New York?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, geography is not everything when it comes to bringing solar online. So definitely geographic differences can shape solar policy, and compared to a state like Nevada, New York does have more land use constraints. We have higher population density. The load is more concentrated in urban centers. We have stricter permitting processes. And so factors like that are going to require very tailored policy approaches. I do think New York has done a lot for the solar industry over the years. And I think especially in light of what's happening at the federal level, it is great and a privilege to be working in states whose leadership wants to be stepping up to the plate and continuing all of our progress on clean energy.
Good to hear, for sure. So is there something that another state is doing better that we could maybe borrow from or use as a policy proposal here?
I'll name two policy proposals that are ongoing in New York and that we can look to other states for. So I mentioned permitting delays and the need to update our permitting process. Both California and Maryland have mandated that its municipalities adopt automated residential permitting. That's something that's under consideration. There's a bill that's introduced in New York with our friends at Permit Power to do the same here. Another thing that I'll point to is with virtual power plants, or as our friends Solar United Neighbors like to call it, distributed power plants. And that's something that we see in a handful of other states. So Hawaii, Texas, Colorado, California, Massachusetts has a small version. Each of those programs can definitely be strengthened, but the gist is that the state compensates households for installing storage at their home and compensates them for the value that those assets are bringing to the grid and incentivizes them to use those assets during times of peak demand. So this is a way to reduce strain on the grid, give power back to the grid when it's most strained. That is of enormous value and something that we want to see customers incentivized to do and compensated for. And it's something that really can be greatly expanded here, especially because we rely so heavily on polluting peaker plants in New York City, and we have these goals to improve and serve disadvantaged communities. This is a great way to reduce grid strain, make the grid more resilient, reduce pollution, and compensate people for participating.
That is something that probably deserves an episode on its own because it's such a cool program. And, as electric vehicles progress, it could be, and they get, reverse charging off of the electric vehicles like the Ford Lightning. Like you could sell back some of your power that's in your battery, or even as electric school buses get more widely adopted, like they sit all summer not doing anything.
Yes.
Schools could make money off of discharging a little bit from their school buses. So
Yes.
Maybe we'll talk about that in a future episode.
I love it.
It's very cool.
It is, and it's technology that exists now that we just need to be able to integrate effectively. That's why I like that term that Solar United Neighbors uses, that it's a distributed power plant. It's very real. It's not virtual. It is actually physically on the grid and something real and tangible.
So I know that community projects in general have an easier time citing themselves than utility projects. And a lot of that's probably just based on the size. It's, more land and whatnot. But I assume there's still some projects that face opposition as you're building these out. How has the experience been, and what can we do to get more communities open to hosting these projects?
It's a good question. I think this is a phrase that gets overused, but we really do need to focus on solutions that are people-centered and meeting people where they are. I don't think that it is helpful for us to be calling people in Facebook groups NIMBYs for, not wanting solar. I think we really do need to hear people out and talk to them about what the benefits of solar can bring to their community and work with them to structure those benefits so that they really are serving community members in a way that makes sense for that locality. I think overall, as solar expands, more and more people are experiencing the benefits firsthand, and they're talking to their friends and families and neighbors about what that looks like, and that really is what fuels greater public support. I think there's a statistic that says the most common reason why someone goes solar is that their neighbor went solar. So to see more solar panels in someone's neighborhood and in their community is a very powerful tool. So it's sort of the better we do, the better we could do.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You almost see them in little clusters, like in neighborhoods, and that completely makes sense. So yeah, I'll talk to my neighbors and try to get them to sign up too, because so far I'm the only one with my solar panels in my neighborhood. A couple ground mounts around because we have the room, but just me with the rooftop. So I'll ask you, what's the big, so you mentioned the expanded goals. We hit our interim goal. Now there's, additional goals in New York for distributed solar. What's the biggest roadblock or challenge to overcome to get to those bigger numbers?
Yeah, I think in talking with our partners in the DG industry, it does seem like the biggest barrier is with interconnection. So the ASAP Act, which was just introduced, I think is going to be a huge tool for meeting that requirement if we are able to sort of codify it and regardless for getting more distributed generation onto the grid. And what that bill does is set up a flexible interconnection system. So it would move away from the sort of all or nothing approach that utilities take right now as to whether something can interconnect. So that feels really important. I also do want to plug again the solar tax credit. We're part of a coalition of climate and affordable housing advocates running a campaign to expand that credit to make it more accessible to low-income homeowners and help us achieve the state mandate of not just having more renewables online, but serving disadvantaged communities in the process. And this really is a necessary tool, not just for equity and doing things the right way, but also for getting the solar on rooftops that we need in order to meet our clean energy goals.
And part of that would also increase the amount of the rebate.
Correct. And it would include storage, which is huge, especially in New York City and in places that are we're all vulnerable to climate change, but in places that and in communities where households really do rely on electricity for medical and health needs and are more likely to experience blackouts in an emergency or just in general with grid outages. The storage piece is huge.
Are there any other policy goals that you're keeping an eye on or bills you want to mention?
Those are our two main things. So the solar roadmap and what's included in there, the solar tax credit, the cap and invest regulations. I'll also plug the GAP Fund. We're part of the Energy Democracy Alliance in addition to New York Renews and the Solar Tax Credit Coalition. And that would create a pre-electrification assistance fund for low-income households to do things like weatherize their homes so that they can then in turn access, sort of energy efficiency and clean energy measures that are otherwise inaccessible to them because they don't have the right residential infrastructure. So that feels really important in sort of closing the solar and storage gap too.
Yeah. Well, you have enough to work on, I think, for this year. So yeah, best of luck with all of that. And Elena, I thank you for being a guest here today.
Thank you, Barry. I hope everyone listening has a great day.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Plugging In. I hope you learned something, and I hope you share this knowledge with someone else. It would be incredibly helpful if you leave us a 5-star review wherever you found this podcast. If there's a topic you would like us to cover in the future or have a question about clean energy, send us an email at podcast@aceny.org. You can follow us on social media using the links in the show notes or consider joining our Clean Energy Supporters mailing list at aceny.org/support. Your support is crucial to creating a brighter and healthier New York. I'll see you next time.
As the sun crests on the horizon, a new day dawns in our state. A new hope for tomorrow is rising, a clean future we create. Tomorrow we breathe easier, tomorrow the skies are clear. Today we are plugging